Hello everyone and welcome to this session. My name is Adish Bhobe and I'm a Senior Product Manager at AWS. And in this session, we're going to talk about how you can use AWS Firewall Manager to audit any overpermissive security groups in your organization. So here's the agenda for this session. I'll start with a quick introduction of the service AWS Firewall Manager. Followed by that, I'll cover some of the current challenges that you as a security administrator face when it comes to auditing for any overpermissive rules in your security groups. I'll then deep dive into some of the current as well as new capabilities that Firewall Manager offers for you to audit any security groups in your organization. And then I'll also supplement that with a few demos that will showcase some common scenarios for which you can audit for using Firewall Manager. And then in the end, I will leave you with a few resources for you to get started. So to level set for anyone who doesn't know, Firewall Manager is a security management service that is leveraged by security administrators like yourself to configure and deploy firewall rules and policies across an entire organization. This could be across accounts or resources that you have in your organization. And even as new accounts and resources are created, Firewall Manager consistently enforces those firewall rules. And we see security admins today across different organizations use Firewall Manager to centrally deploy AWS WAF rules, to deploy DDoS protections offered by Shield Advanced, and also configure VPC security groups and audit VPC security groups for any overpermissive rules. In addition, you can also view any security notifications offered by Firewall Manager on Security Hub alongside other security services. Now, in this session, we'll only focus on how you can audit any of your VPC security groups for overpermissive rules. And for any security admin or security engineer who's listening to this session, you will relate to the fact that oftentimes your security groups can end up being overpermissive for a variety of different reasons. Now, we know that security groups are virtual firewalls for your EC2 instances, and you can enable rules to have inbound and outbound traffic going in and out of those EC2 instances. But oftentimes, they can end up being overpermissive because of very wide CIDR ranges or port ranges that are too permissive, or because there are applications such as SSH or RDP that may have been exposed to the internet. And so you want to make sure that such applications and such rules are tracked, audited, and finally remediated. However, there are some challenges when it comes to auditing and monitoring for these overpermissive VPC security groups. And again, for any security engineer or any security administrator who's part of a larger security team, you will hopefully relate to some of these challenges that I'm going to talk about. So first, you'll see a lot of times that security groups are owned by individual application developers within an organization. And because these are owned by these application developers, they may or may not always adhere to the centrally mandated set of rules that you as a security admin want to enforce. While application developers are rapidly creating resources and applications, it may or may not always be their focus to have security as part of that. And so with that, the second key challenge is also to constantly keep track of all the changes that are happening across your organization. There may be new applications or changes to existing resources that are happening within different accounts. And so maybe you have audited your entire infrastructure at some point, but those changes might then trigger another set of audit checks that you may need to do, which can be very cumbersome and error prone and tedious to do at scale across your organization. And then the third challenge is that you would also need to have central visibility, which is very hard and challenging to have today on across all your accounts, and take actions to remediate. This can particularly be challenging if you are part of a compliance team where you want to ensure to internal or external auditors that all your applications are adhering to certain mandated rules. But doing that at scale can quickly become or take several weeks of job to do across. So in the next slide, I want to talk about some of the key capabilities that you as an admin want to equip yourself with, and at the same time I want to talk about some of the features that Firewall Manager offers that will help you meet some of those gaps and overcome some of those pain points. So the first thing that you as a security admin needs is to have a single central admin account from where you can monitor and audit all your VPC security groups across your accounts without having to do that manually on each and every single account or a set of production accounts that you have grouped under organizational units. And so because Firewall Manager integrates with AWS organizations, it natively offers you that ability to have a single account from where you can deploy audit rules across your accounts. And even as new accounts are created, Firewall Manager will automatically detect those and enforce those rules consistently. Secondly, as an admin, you often spend hours, days, sometimes even weeks configuring audit checks for certain compliance needs that you have within your team. And when those configurations change, you'll have to once again go back and reconfigure all those changes. And that can be tedious if you're doing that across different accounts and different subsets of accounts. And so Firewall Manager offers you managed policies that we recently launched this year to help you audit and remediate for these overpermissive rules. And these are nothing but pre-configured rules and pre-configured audit checks that you can readily enable across your entire organization with minimal configuration and minimal configuration steps. And so it takes away a lot of the heavy lifting and operational burden of configuring rules and reconfigure them when any of those compliance needs change. The third key aspect that you need as a security admin is to make sure that your resources are continuously audited for and that you have an audit ready infrastructure at all times. This can again get very tedious if you are doing that across multiple accounts and looking for and tracking for those changes in those rules at all times. Again, over here, because Firewall Manager uses AWS config in the background, it is able to continuously check for those changes on new or existing resources, track them, and surface them to you in one single account. And so all of this culminates with the need to also have a central dashboard. And as I talked about this before, as a security admin or an engineer, you want to have this central reporting dashboard to view all your non-compliant or permissive rules, share it with your compliance team, and also report it to your internal or external auditors. This can also be a dashboard from where you can then take the action to further remediate any of those overpermissive rules. And so Firewall Manager recently launched a central reporting dashboard where you can view all of these overpermissive rules and take the necessary actions to remediate them further. And so with that, I want to next go into a couple of demos that will show how all of this works in action. And while I do that, I also want to walk you through some of the key prerequisites that you would need to equip yourself before you can get started and start onboarding on Firewall Manager. So there are three key prerequisites that are required to leverage Firewall Manager. The first thing would be to have your organization master pair account enable AWS organizations in full feature mode across your to have all your accounts part of this. Secondly, you would need to also enable AWS config across all your accounts in all your regions. And as I alluded to this before, this would be required to continuously audit and check for any changes in those rules and track any new resources that appear in your organization. And then once these two steps are completed, they would also need to designate one of the accounts in your organization as the Firewall Manager administrator. Now, this could very well be your account from where you can start creating audit checks and deploying them across your accounts, and then also using Firewall Manager dashboard to view all of those audit non-compliant rules. So in my demo, I want to showcase a very common scenario that you would see in your organization where you have your administrator. This could be your account from where you want to then audit security group rules for your member accounts. So I'm going to demo this using my account as the Firewall Manager administrator to look for overpermissive rules in member account 1 and member account 2. And I'm going to do this using a Firewall Manager policy. Now, a Firewall Manager policy is nothing but a set of configuration items, including the rules that you want to audit for in your organization, the actions you want to take when there is a match to this audit rules, which could be to just get a report or to actually go ahead and remediate those and delete them or reconfigure them based on your audit checks. And then based on the rules and the action, you would also need to define the scope of where you want to deploy these policies and rules. This could be the accounts and resources that you want to specifically audit for. So for example, you could say, I only want to audit my accounts and resources in my prod environment, and do that consistently even as new accounts and resources are added. And you can do all of this using a single Firewall Manager policy. And we'll see that in our first demo, where I want to showcase a very common scenario that a lot of the security engineers watching this session would relate to, where you want to look for any overpermissive CIDR ranges in your organization, where you have security groups with such source and destination CIDR ranges. And you want to detect these security groups and then remediate or take appropriate action. So to do that, we'll switch to our console, and we'll start by looking at member account 1. So we are on the VPC console for our member account number 1, and we want to look at the security groups within this account. You can see there is a default security group, but we also have a second security group which has inbound and outbound rules. And if you look at the source and the destination mentioned in the rules, they can be considered to be fairly overpermissive because of their the range of CIDR prefix length that they have mentioned in the source and destination field. And so you want to make sure that such rules are audited for, and also mandate certain minimal range that you want any of your rules to have. We also see that these are tagged under the prod environment, and so this can be something that you definitely want to audit for. Now we'll switch to the AWS Firewall Manager console, where we have our admin account already assigned. We can see that we have completed all the prerequisites required to onboard Firewall Manager, including the organizations and the config requirement. So we can begin by creating a policy to audit. And once you do that, you'll see different options depending on which policy type you want to assign. For our case, we'll jump right into security groups, and this opens up a host of different options depending on your use case. For our use case, we want to look for how we can audit and enforce certain security group rules in our organization. So we'll go with the second option there. And then each Firewall Manager policy is region based, so you'll need to specify which region you want to enforce these rules in. Now, this opens up next step, how you want to describe your policy. So we can start by giving this policy a name. But along with that, you can also define what policy rules you want to audit for. And as we talked about this before, Firewall Manager offers a set of managed audit policies. These are predefined or pre-configured rules and audit checks that require minimal configuration. And so for our use case, where we want to only look for over-permissive security group rules, we will select the first option. And once we toggle this, opens up a couple of sub options where you can specify what protocols you want explicitly defined within your rules. You can also deny the use of all in the protocol section within your target security groups. You can also deny certain rules having port range greater than the number you specify. You can also deny rules having IPv4 CIDR range less than any number you specify. And so for our use case, where we want to detect for these over permissive CIDR ranges, we'll set the third option there to 16. So anything less than 16 will be flagged as over permissive. Now in the policy action, it again presents you with two different options. The first option is where you can simply get a report of all those over permissive rules. The second option is where you can not just get that report, but also remediate them based on what you consider to be over permissive. So as a best practice, we generally advise that you select just the identification before we go into the auto remediation. Moving on, the next page opens up different options where you can define where you want to apply these rules and these actions. And this can be done across your accounts, resource types, and also you can scope them based on certain tagged resources that you have within your organization. So you can be as far-reaching or as specific as possible. For our demo, we'll only look at the member account number 1 that we want to audit for, which is part of our production account. You can also do this based on organizational units if you have them grouped under specific organizational units for prod or dev. And then in the resource types, you have the option to select whether you want to do this for security groups on EC2 instances, ENIs, or simply all the security groups in your organization. You can also scope this based on tags. So for instance, you can say, I only want to audit for all the resources and all the security groups that are part of my prod environment. So as we looked at this earlier, I'm only going to look at or only going to audit for any resources and security groups that fall under the prod environment. And this becomes a very effective tool because then you can have your application developers quickly spin up their resources and tag them without worrying too much about the security configurations. But then as a security admin, you can use this scoping to exclusively only audit for those rules and those resources that are part of that environment. In the next step, this is an optional step where you can configure a tag for your policy if you wish to track this later. And then in the last step, this is where you review all the details of your policy and your actions. And then once you're satisfied with all of the details, you can go ahead and create the policy. So as you can see, in just a few configuration steps, we were able to create our audit policies and deploy them across different accounts and different resources. So once the policy has been created, in the background you'll have AWS config deploying those and tracking those for any of the non-compliant rules or over-permissive rules that we have set. So while it does that, it's going to take a few moments to show any of those non-compliant accounts. And once it displays those accounts, which it just did, we can then further explore this by going into the policy and seeing which account was non-compliant. Once it shows the account, we can also look at the security groups. And once we click on the security group, this brings up the central reporting dashboard that I was talking about earlier. This is the dashboard that showcases all the non-compliant over-permissive rules in your organization. So as we saw earlier, this brings up the ingress and the egress rules within one of our member accounts security group, and it is flagged as over-permissive because of the CIDR range, which is considered to be wide, based on the referenced audit rule that we set in the admin account. It also provides you with a remediation action, if you see that in the fourth column there. And the remediation recommendation would be to modify that to match with the prefix range that we have specified in our audit check. You can also automate this by automatically remediating this security group, in which case it will modify all of those rules to match with the security audit check that we have. So in this case, to do that, you'll just have to go back to the policy action step and auto remediate. Once the auto remediation kicks in, it will go ahead and modify all the security groups and the security group rules to match with the minimum CIDR range that we have specified in our central account over here. And so we can see that it's already being remediated. So to confirm that, we can then go into our demo section, and we see that it is now compliant. And to verify this on the member account side, we switched to the VPC console for the member account. And if we look at the inbound and the outbound rules that were previously over permissive, we can now see that they are now matching with the minimum prefix length that we specified in our audit account, Firewall Manager audit account. And so this makes it really easy with a few configuration steps to quickly track, audit, and then take the necessary remediation action to fix any of those rules across your organization. So in the next demo, I again want to talk about a very common scenario that a lot of the security engineers would experience, where you want to audit for applications such as RDP or SSH that can be considered to be high risk when open to the internet. And you want to present these to maybe your compliance team to make sure that you are complying with all the necessary organizational standards, and then also take the necessary actions to remediate these rules within your accounts. So let's jump into the demo. Here we have our member account 2. And we'll again explore the security group for this member account, which is the security group demo 2. We'll see that in the inbounds rules section, we have 2 rules, SSH and RDP applications that are exposed to the internet. And these can be considered to be fairly over permissive. So as a security admin, you would want to audit and look for these security groups and quickly remediate them to prevent any undesired traffic from hitting your applications. So in order to do that, we'll once again go back to the Firewall Manager dashboard for our account, and we'll start by creating the policy for auditing. And in the describe policy section over here, this time while we're still focusing on the managed policy, we'll select how you can audit for high risk applications. So by selecting or toggling this option, you have a couple of sub options where you can say what applications you want to specifically allow access to local CIDR ranges, or what applications that you want to specifically have public access to, such as 0/0. For our use case, we'll only select the second option. So we'll specify what applications you want to enable to have public access, and you can create your own applications by giving a protocol name, an application name, and a port number. Alternately, you can also choose one of our predefined set of applications that we provide. And if you look into this list of applications, these are very commonly seen applications that are open to the or exposed to the internet, such as HTTP and HTTPS. So anything other than HTTP and HTTPS will now be flagged as overpermissive and will be surfaced as non-compliant. Again, in the policy action, we only want to first identify those resources and then take the step to remediate further. To scope this policy, we will look at only member account 2 for our use case. So in order to do that, we'll select the second account here. And then in the resource type and the resource tagging section, again, we will only look for resources that are tagged with an environment prod because we only want to make sure that any of the resources in the prod section for those accounts will be flagged as overpermissive. And then we'll consider this step to be optional to tag the policy. But then as a last step, we will then review and create the policy if all the details look good. So again, as you can see, in just a few configuration steps, you are able to create an audit check for your accounts and look for these different applications to make sure that they are not exposed to the internet. And once Firewall Manager surfaces these non-compliant accounts, we can then further explore by digging into the policy and the account. So we see that the member account 2 this time is non-compliant, and if we look at the security group, this again brings up our centralized dashboard showcasing the different rules that were flagged as overpermissive. So in this case, you have SSH and RDP both in the ingress rules within that account that were flagged as non-compliant and considered to be overpermissive based on the audit checks that we have. If you look at the fourth column, it also recommends you that you take the remediation action to remove the rule. And again, you can automate the remediation action through Firewall Manager. And this can be done by, again, going back to the policy details page and then switching the action of the policy from just identifying to actually remediating those rules. Once those rules have been auto-remediated, you can confirm that by looking at the account. And again, to verify this on the member account side, we will switch to the VPC console and look at the rules in this security group. As you can see now, those rules have been remediated. They have been deleted from the child account that was considered to be non-compliant. Again, this provides you with a very easy to use set of configuration checks that you can quickly enable with minimal configuration without having to do a lot of heavy lifting at your end. So I want to recap and summarize what we have learned so far. We have just seen in the demo how you are able to create these rules. We talked about what challenges you as a security administrator face when it comes to monitoring and auditing for security group rules that could be considered overpermissive and do that at scale. We talked about how you can use Firewall Manager and leverage the managed policies that we launched this year to enable these out-of-box rules and check for any overpermissive rules. We then dove into some of the scenarios where you could analyze different violations on a centralized dashboard, and then based on the recommended remediation actions, you can then go ahead and modify or delete those rules from your organization. So as a last step, I want to leave you with a few resources so that you can get started and start using our service. First, you can visit our website and you can start using the managed policies from the console or the API. And then we also launched an AWS solution, which is a reference solution to help you automate the setup of all the Firewall Manager prerequisites. You can also use this CloudFormation stack sets offered by the solution to quickly spin up all the managed audit checks that we talked about in this session. And with that, we have come to the end of this session. Thank you for listening and hope you enjoyed. And we look forward to your feedback as always. Thank you.